Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Nyama, Wanjari Woyorangulyin, Gunganinu Bik Wenawap Darabandari, Nyariana Nyanga Bik Ban Nyagu, Gagukal Nangit Bambuth Yalingbu Ba Gamaji. I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people on whose land Darebin Council stands. I recognise their ongoing connection to land, water and country, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you all for coming out tonight for this meeting. Membership is as listed in the agenda. We have apologies from Councillor Messina and Councillor Greco. Disclosures of conflict of interest. Councillors, does anyone have a conflict to disclose this evening? No, there are no conflicts of interest. So, confirmation of the minutes of the previous Planning Committee meeting. That's moved by Councillor Lasserf, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Amir, thank you. All those in favour? That motion is carried. That brings us to consideration of reports, the first report being 5.1, 650 to 652 Plenty Road and 121 Renee Street, Preston. Over to you, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Council has received an application at 650 to 652 Plenty Road and 121 Rennie Street, Preston. The proposal is to construct a 4-storey mixed-use building, and it's to contain one convenience restaurant of about 106 square metres, one shop of 40 square metres, and 21 dwellings. 3 of them are single-bed dwellings, 17 are 2-bedroom dwellings, and 1 is a 3-bedroom dwelling. A total of 27 car spaces are provided. Open spaces in the form of balconies for each unit, and there's also a communal rooftop terrace. Notice on site was given by 2 signs, and letters were sent to surrounding owners and occupiers. 29 objections were received. These objections are summarised on pages 13 and 14 and then responded to on pages 14 through to 17 of the officer's report. The proposal has been designed to comply, where possible, with the requirements of the DDO 17, along with conditions of any approval to ensure that the changes carried out, the development is considered to respond appropriately to the policies and requirements of our Darebin planning scheme and to the location, and to its location on Plenty Road. This, along with conditions that address ESD, WSUD, materials and finishes, bicycle car parking and accessibility, result in a reasonable development that complies with policy. Therefore, the officer's recommendation is to support the proposal and issue a notice of decision to grant a planning permit. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We have both the applicant and some objectors who have come here this evening to address the Planning Committee. I'll start by asking the applicant, Simon Martin, to come up, please. Thank you, Mr. Martin. You have 5 minutes to address the Planning Committee.
Is this working?
Yes,
yeah.
Thanks.
They're different. Every council has a different method. But thank you, councillors and Mayor. As you might expect, the plans before you have undergone considerable scrutiny and subsequent fine-tuning, I might use in this term, since they were first lodged with Council in November last year. The mix of layouts has been described to you, and the number of apartments has changed over that period. The facade treatments have been altered in response to Council's urban design feedback, and setbacks have been increased to the nearest residential area, which, if you have a plan there, you'll see that the nearest is along Rennie Street, beyond a right-of-way along which abuts the eastern edge of our site. The setbacks to that property range between 2.5 metres at first floor, putting aside a balcony screening, up to a maximum of 12.1 metres to the roof terrace. And that I haven't included in that setback distance the 3-metre wide buffer or laneway, which is also then assisted further by the fact the neighbour has their, you can see on each of the floor plans, they have a driveway that runs along their western boundary, alongside the right-of-way, and also a garage and covered carport. Obviously, in this case, we've been guided to a significant extent by Council's own policies, including the more prescriptive requirements in the DDO, Schedule 17. And this is demonstrated by plan, if you've got that available, TPO 9, which shows the east-west section and includes a setback line, which in turn is taken directly from the schedule's requirements. And you can just see that on the top image there. I'm also pleased to advise that the proposal achieves, and in fact, in some cases marginally exceeds, the parking requirements of the planning scheme with 26 car spaces. It's got an additional space above and beyond. And likewise, the 21 bicycle spaces is 8 more than the 13 specified in the planning scheme. And in fact, you'll note, should you adopt the recommendation, that 6 more bicycles are to be provided through permit condition. Further important, and importantly, this Plenty Road site is within a neighbourhood activity centre and is deemed by council to be within a significant housing change area. As such, it's submitted that a part 4-storey building, which is stepped away from its sensitive interfaces and containing a mix of commercial and residential uses, we say is eminently appropriate. In fact, it's prescribed virtually by policy for this important part of the Plenty Road corridor. The Planning Officer's report has provided a detailed response to each of the concerns raised by the objectors. Suffice to say that we agree with the assessment that our proposal will not unreasonably overlook or overshadow those properties, and to perhaps reference a somewhat overused term, it's not an overdevelopment of the site. I also note that many of the objections, in fact 95% or more, were from the standard pro forma, thereby just signed by the neighbours. And to that extent, we actually don't know as to which of the individual submitters have actually even viewed the plans, if at all. What is currently an unattractive and underutilised property, mainly taken up by an old used car dealership, will, with your approval, be transformed to a mixed-use site containing a contemporary, well-articulated and respectful 3-level apartment building sitting atop an internalised car park and commercial ground floor tenancies. My client and I therefore ask that you accept and adopt the officer's recommendation that a notice of decision be issued with the suggested conditions. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. You may resume your seat in the gallery. Thank you. Now, I have 3 objectors on my list. Can I just confirm that each of these people is here and make sure there's no one else expecting to speak, because that will impact on how we allocate time. So I have Zins Zhu. Thank you. Angela Carroll. Yes. And Mary Duran. Is there anyone else who... No, that's great. So ordinarily you would have 5 minutes between you, and that would be 1 minute and 40 seconds or so each. I think in the interests of making this a little bit easier, I'll give you each 2 minutes. And so I'll first invite Zinzu to come up. So please come up to the chair. Thank you, and there'll be a clock up there you can see which will count down your 2 minutes.
Okay, my English is not good. I just want to say my thinking, because my mom is, this house is my mother's house. He is 87 years old. We need sunshine for our backyard. If high building there, we don't think so. So she is, too old, need everything get sunshine, and the clothes need sunshine. So, and also gardening. She want the only interest is her gardening. The everyday need to look at that one. If no sunshine, I think don't have gardening, and also she can't get the sunshine. Yeah, maybe later is more years old. Just go to backyard. Can't go anyway. So we don't want too high building there. Yeah. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, yes?
Could we just have the house of the mother identified again?
So the address I have it is 646 Plenty Road, is that correct? Yeah, so 646 Plenty Road,
So they are
Preston.
to the south of this. Just trying to identify the location for the
2 properties south, I think. 648's next door. That's 648. That's
So that's, Mr Rudd is marking on the map where that house is. Okay, thank you. So next I'd like to invite Angela Carroll to come up, please. The staff member will pass those around.
Okay.
Thanks, okay, we'll share. Thank you, you'll need. Thank you, Ms Carroll.
Thank you. Good evening, Darebin Councillor. Sorry, this is my first time, so I apologise for making mistakes. I'm speaking on behalf of Stuart Midgley, who's not in Melbourne at the moment, and he was unaware that there was more than one reader. So I'll just point it out, the one with the red spot, if you want to follow.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll start with number one. Plans show the building encroaches into the sewer easement with overlap by a supporting pillar and the 11-car mechanical parking stacker. 45-degree building setbacks exceeded on the eastern boundary for levels 1 and 2. 648 Plenty Road to the south is to be overshadowed by a 4-storey building on its boundary. Overlooking. The development sits near the ridge top and overlooks the secluded private open space of 119 Rennie Street, which is where I reside, and 648 Plenty Road. Non-compliant functional layout, 9 apartments, 103, 202 to 209, rely upon kitchens that extend into the corridor and block access to the front door, stairs and toilet. The Building Code of Australia defines habitable rooms to include the kitchen and to exclude corridors and hallways. Galley kitchens serve trains, ships and aeroplanes, but not dwellings. Placing a kitchen in the corridor breaks the definition of a dwelling, making 9 of 21 apartments uninhabitable. A roller door to the garage is located opposite 3 bedrooms at 119 Rennie Street. Apartments 104, 208, 209 and 210 have bedrooms directly above the garage, roller door and car stackers. So to conclude, because I have to be very quick, in conclusion, this proposal creates a non-functional building that does not meet the minimum standards of the LPPF, BADS or BCA. For the reasons outlined above, I request this proposal be rejected. Over development of the site in Waikama, Darwin. Thank you. Excuse for writing the handwritten notes because it concerned me more.
That's okay, that's well done. Thank you for presenting to us.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
The next person is Mary Duran. I'll invite Mary to come up.
Good evening, councillors. I live in Reen Street, which is the street that comes in off Plenty Road. That's the corner of the development. And I wanted to note a couple of things, particularly around the car parking, that although the developer notes that the car parking exceeds a minimum requirement, it relies on a car stacker. And the car stackers are notoriously underused in these sorts of developments, and usually the cars end up in the street. Not only do the cars end up in the street, but it means the traffic is in and out of the street. Reen Street is the only right turn before Tyler Street, which means all of the cars tend to use Reen Street to come in off Tyler Street in that direction, and that produces a public safety risk, particularly for school children and the elderly. A lot of the kids go to school at Preston Primary School, the primary school age children, and they're using Reen Street and coming up and crossing the road there. The other issue I wanted to raise was around the quality of development, that there is a lot of development happening in Darebin that, excuse the term, but they end up being just dog boxes. So trying to retain the amenity in the neighbourhood of providing livable residences for people who choose to live in Darebin, I would think is a priority of this committee, and I don't think this plan meets those requirements.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Councillors, I'd now like to ask if you have any questions of the officers. Councillor Lasserf.
I'm just wondering if the officers could make comment on some of the things that were raised by one of the objectors in terms of the non-compliant layout and the way that the area within the living areas have been calculated.
The proposal was considered against all the appropriate sections of the planning scheme, the DDO, the apartment sections of Res Code. It complies mostly with all of those requirements, except for a few minor modifications required as conditions. So the the officer's recommendation to council is that they comply with the requirements of the planning scheme.
Just ask one more question.
Certainly.
There's another point that was in the objector's document around the width of the corridor from the elevator. Now, there are all of these accessible apartments, but the corridor coming from the elevator isn't accessible. Is that correct?
Let me just check. It does look that like when you travel from the lift along that narrower section of the corridor against units 202, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9 and 10 does narrow down. Excuse me. My understanding is that they do comply with the requirements of the apartment buildings in respect to that, but I can just...
But in terms of the accessibility, they're claiming these apartments are accessible. Are they not accessible to the same extent?
The development was considered against the relevant sections of the apartment requirements and against accessibility, and it talks about widening doorway openings. There's a couple of conditions that request that there be some minor modifications, but otherwise my understanding is that it complies with those requirements under 5507, which is about accessibility under the planning scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Are there further questions from councillors? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes. Mayor Rennie, just through you, we've had a generalised comment that objections raised in regards to breaches of local planning schemes, setbacks, etc., have generally been applied by condition. But I would like to go through those one by one to see where those conditions apply. So I've just got, 4, of course, I'd like to ask individually.
Sure.
The number 1, the plans show the building encroaches onto the sewer assessment with an overlapping supporting pillar. So has that been addressed with condition, and what condition is there?
On page 15 of the report, it talks about response to the building encroaches over the sewer easement. The construction over an easement is not a relevant planning matter. It is the responsibility of the applicant developer to ensure that they have appropriate consents to construct over an easement. It's noted Council's Infrastructure and Capital Delivery Unit have not objected to the application of the grounds of constructing over the easement. So they would need to confirm with the appropriate bodies that it is okay to build over the easement, but planning can't say at this stage that you must not.
Yep. Okay.
Next.
Now, there's some objection raised on the 45-degree building setback. And again, there's sort of some there's a statement in the officer's report saying it's not assessed by the 45-degree setback. So can we have some clarity about what setback applies here in the DDA? Obviously, because only ward councillors would be more familiar with it.
Okay. In the officer's report, it does speak about the 45 degree and the assessment against it. In relation to the building setbacks, the report does talk about the second and third floors are generally set back in accordance with the required 45 degrees as measured 3 metres above the ground level at the eastern property boundary. But it's noted that just the screening associated with the balconies of a few of the dwellings encroach into that 45 degree setback. The officer's report believes that that's reasonable because the encroachment is such a minimal encroachment. The majority of the building is set back in accordance with or in excess of the requirements of the schedule. Length of the screen is minimal in the encroachment, and the balconies are not opposite sensitive areas on the eastern residential property.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Lawrence, have you got a further question? Sure.
With your indulgence. The overlooking is raised in relation to 119 Rennie Street. So what conditions have been applied to address that, if any?
The officer's report refers to the development being designed to limit views into neighbouring secluded private open space, and that would be 119 Rennie and obviously the Plenty Road property as well. All upper storey windows and balconies are appropriately designed or have been screened to to reduce the overlooking in accordance with the planning scheme requirements. And a condition of any approval will require the louver screens to be designed to allow outward views to improve the internal amenity of the development. So they're not just screening off any view outside. You can go out but not down, that's my understanding.
Councillor Lawrence, your final question.
Yes, I'm just going through it. So, and the other one was in relation to the non-compliant functional layout of 9 apartments. We seem to have got one answer, but it seemed to be referring to the internal corridors between the apartments. This objection seems to be referring to access inside. So my question just is that compliant with some of the more recent thinking, which is about whether or not you can get ambulance beds out in and out of these apartments? So is it disability compliant?
There has been assessment against accessibility. It talks about at least 50% of the dwellings within a development need to, or suggested that they should comply with a certain number of points under accessibility under clause 5507. In this case, 66% of the development comply with things like a clear opening width of at least 850 to the entrance to the dwelling and a main bedroom. That's one of the things they look at. A clear path with a minimum width of 1.2 metres that connects dwelling entrance to the main bedroom and adaptable bathroom and living area. And another of the points is a main bedroom with access to an adaptable bathroom. They're the kind of things that the planning scheme talks about as being requirements for consideration, and these dwellings, most of them do. The ones that don't just need some minor tweaking. I think there's a cupboard in one entrance doorway that needs to be removed or narrowed a bit to allow those specific width requirements. And slightly widening one of the passageways. So that's it has been assessed against the accessibility requirements of that planning scheme, and that's the internal ones.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Rennie.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Williams.
I'd just like to get clarification if it's been addressed regarding the site, which actually used to have a petrol area, Has the soil and that been tested and that has no contamination or pollution? And what is the timeframe? Because I'm not familiar with sites that have been, that had activity of obviously of a petrol outlet.
There's actually no specific, in respect to planning, there's no specific timeframes, but what we do is that there is an environmental audit overlay over the land. So part of the requirement for any approval would be that before the development commences, that the applicant would have to obtain either a certificate of environmental audit or an environmental auditor who is appointed under the Act provides a statement that says, that's in accordance with the Act and that says that the environmental conditions of the land are suitable for sensitive uses. So that is a requirement as part of any approval here, is that before they start development that needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Councillors, are there further questions? If not, is there a motion from anyone? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'd like to move an alternate motion to refuse the application.
Thank you. Is that seconded by Councillor McCarthy? Thank you. I'll just see if the officers have a copy of that alternate motion. Otherwise, I'll get you to read it out. Perhaps you could read it while the officers are looking to get that up on the screen.
Alternate motion, refuse the application.
Here we go. I think we have it up.
Yep, great, because it's quite long.
There we are. Can you confirm that that's the motion you're expecting?
Yes.
Thank you, and that's seconded by Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So there are aspects to this application that I think are good. So in particular, the rain garden, I also see that there's a cable trellis for climber growth on the front and a rainwater harvest catchment. But what I also see is 29 objections, including 3 who spoke to us tonight, who all had different issues with this development. So I think that probably goes against what the applicant was saying about 95% being pro forma. We've seen about 10% of the objections here tonight, with all different reasons. We also know that what we've been presented has an overall height of 15.6 metres when the actual mandatory height requirement here is 14 metres. We know that this building isn't sufficiently set back from the east property boundary and doesn't have a great interface to Renee Street. And I also really find this building quite bulky. And while I'm not against car stackers and I'm not against height, they can be problematic. So for me, this one needs a little bit more work.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy.
I'll withhold my seconding speech for the moment. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lyons.
Yes, I'll just speak in favour of the alternate motion. This site...
Councillor Lyons, can I just get you to put your microphone on for the video? Thank you.
So this site is obviously a prime site for urban renewal and development. It's been underutilised in some ways for some time, and it, contributes with greater density of people. It will contribute to the economic development of Plenty Road there. But the history in this road has a great history in terms of detailed debate that I have been involved in on the actual DDO and the planning about the setbacks. And the setbacks are about a reasonable response from this community, accepting that there will be development along the commercial strip, but asking for us to prosecute proper setbacks that do not give overdue bulk to the surrounding properties, which remain residential and should be protected. So I think that this, application is here. It's almost there, but it's pushed the boundaries of many things. Livability and access, I think, could have been delivered right across the site because, we're now aware with feedback from Ambulance Victoria that there are great difficulties with these sites and they are aimed at disabled and elderly people. So, that's a problem. And then all these setback and encroachments are caused by just squeezing the site a bit too much. So it's unfortunate because, if it was slightly more modest, it could have respected council policy and respected the neighbourhoods around it and respected the livability inside it, and still, I'm sure, had quite a big yield there. But it's pushing the boundaries for both our future residents and our existing residents at this time. Thank you, Mayor Rennie.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there further speakers? Councillor McCarthy, do you wish to take up that?
No, it's fine.
No? Oh, Councillor Amir.
This is a challenging one because there are absolutely some good features of this site, these proposals, particularly some three-bedroom apartments, perhaps not as many as people would like, but we often see plans with no three-bedroom apartments. I was very happy to see that. I also like the roof garden. It is an area that is flagged for high density, so we're going to have to, there will be high density in this area. So for me, it's not about the size of the building, the height of the building, because that's going to be inevitable. For me, it's about the internal amenity. And in these plans, we have so many very small 3x3 metre bedrooms, to have so many apartments where you can't actually get to your couch without walking through the kitchen, where there might be knives, there might be hot ovens. What if you've got your arms full of shopping? What if you're covered in mud? Like, it just seems like it isn't designed for the people who are going to live there. It's designed to squish in as many apartments as you can. And accepting the report around disability access, my view of it is that it seems like some of those accessible apartments are only accessible as long as you have no furniture in them, which seems, furniture in the way that the apartments have been designed to have a separate cooking space, dining space and living space. And again, that just seems like not considerate of the way that people actually want to live, and perhaps a bit of false advertising is saying that these are these spaces that can be used, when in the case for people who are in a wheelchair, that's actually not going to be feasible. So while I'd be happy to approve a building of this size and shape, I hope that we can reach a conclusion that can have better internal amenity with better accessibility, maybe some bigger bedrooms and larger apartments. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Councillor Williams.
I have also concerns regarding this particular application, for reasons that the parking, particularly in the side street, if you have two cars parked on either side, it's very difficult. It's like a Mexican standoff where you're not able to actually get through. One will have to reverse. So I do have concerns with the side street. The internal amenity, I have huge concerns. I find that, as my previous councillors has already suggested, the layout, but most of all, it's accessibility. Accessibility is for an ambulance to turn up where they're not able to gain access in a wheelchair, if you're in a wheelchair, or an ambulance if they're able to gain a bed up there to wheel somebody out. So, or even a family that has a pram. So these are real concerns, because we are having a growing population growth, not only just in Darebin, but everywhere. And we need to consider what our future is going to look like. If we have a population that is ageing, we need to start building for the future. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there further speakers?
I will
Councillor
exercise my
McCarthy.
secondary rights, if that's okay, Mayor. Chair. One figure jumps out for me in this application, and it's you pick it up a couple of times when you go through the assessment of the various clauses, and continuously there is a line there which we see from in most planning applications, which is complies with the objective subject to conditions. But a figure that pops out continuously is 66%. Compliance, and that's 66% compliance when it comes to solar access. It's the same figure when it comes to accessibility. For me, that says a lot about this application, and I would follow on from Councillor Lawrence's points before. It's almost there, it's not there, and 2/3 of the internal amenity and 2/3 of the compliance of these apartments are pretty much there, but there's that extra third, which is actually important because people will live in those. So whilst I appreciate the efforts that the applicant and the owner, and the representative have gone to try to make a case for this, I think we need to be frank about the quality of development, the long-term amenity, internal and external. I appreciate that residents along this section of Plenty Road have gone through the process of understanding the planning controls that are in place, that both limit and contain and define what the appropriate heights and bulks and setbacks should be along this section. And to some extent, this application does observe that, although the officers have also had to condition it into compliance, including reducing the height level and influencing other aspects of the external parts of the property. This is important because those planning controls were put in place through a rigorous process of community engagement and consultation, and that's the first bar that you have to meet in order to actually get approval in this room, as far as I'm concerned. So, on that basis, happy to second Councillor Newton's refusal and move on from that point on.
Thank you. There being no further speakers, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. The Planning Committee has decided to refuse the permit. This decision can be appealed to VCAT. The applicant can appeal against the decision and has 60 days to do so. Should an appeal be lodged, every objector will be notified by VCAT. Notices detailing the decision tonight and how an appeal can be lodged will be sent to all objectors and the applicant next week. Thank you. That brings us to the next matter on the agenda, which is 5.2, application for 295 to 297 Gilbert Road, Preston.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. This application was deferred from the previous Planning Committee meeting of the 20th of June 2019 to enable the permit applicant to resolve some issues that were identified regarding vehicle access to the garages. This issue has been addressed through further minor amendments to the plans. The application itself seeks approval for a 3-storey mixed-use development, including 6 dwellings, whilst retaining a ground floor shop. The front facade of the existing shop is proposed to be retained, enabling the development to take advantage of the current 0 setback. The 6 dwellings include 1 single bedroom with a study, also a single 2-bedroom dwelling, and then 4 2-bedroom dwellings that also include a study. The 2 rear dwellings transition to a 2-storey form down to the lower scale at the rear. 5 single-car garages are provided on the ground floor with access via Gilbert Road to an additional car space adjoining where the shop will remain. The subject land has an area of 636 square metres, and due to its location adjacent Tram Route 11, it is identified in Council's planning strategy as a substantial change area. So what that means, Mayor Rennie, is that the area is encouraged for increased densities, and what the planning scheme allows is up to a maximum of 3 storeys through the general residential zone. So one of the things that enables a development like this to be contemplated on this site is the context. There is a series of warehouses and other uses to the south, and this site's trying to make a transition into the residential areas further to the north and the west. This application has been advertised. There have been 6 objections received. These objections are summarised and responded to on pages 47 and 48 of the officer's report, and you'll see that they deal with a range of issues. The application has been assessed, having regard to what the planning strategy says, also to, as you'll see in the checklist, a high level of compliance. The application before you is recommended for support with a notice of decision subject to conditions contained in the officer's report.
Thank you, Mr. Rudd. We have the applicant listed to speak to this application tonight. That's Mr. Craig Gladman. Mr. Gladman, I'll invite you to come up and present to the Planning Committee.
Hello, everyone. I guess the main issue we have with the development is we feel that the number of habitable rooms have been unrepresented. If you look at page 77 of the agenda, we feel that units 2, 3 and 4, the retreats in those bottom floors are all bedrooms. I noted that the planning response was that these are transitional spaces, so they couldn't be used as bedrooms, but then if you look at units 5 and 6, they've clearly labelled the exact same space a bedroom. So I guess I'm questioning, if we're having rules around parking limitations, then we make it so easy to circumvent them. I'd just be of the opinion in 18 months' time that'll be advertised as a 3-bedroom apartment, I could almost guarantee you. So taking them in as bedrooms, then there's clearly insufficient car parking, and I think it needs to be revisited as a design. That was probably the main point. I think that this is the first time I've actually heard that we're in a 3-storey overlay. I think the reason most of us would be surprised about that is because there is no 3-storey buildings within anywhere near this particular development. If you look at page 75, even the plan view of the actual design, every other building in that area is a single-storey family home, effectively, and you can go blocks in either direction before you hit a 3-storey development. So I do realise that there's a warehouse next door, but really they're two anomalies in a big area of family housing. So I would definitely question whether 3 storeys is appropriate for this particular area. We do have some general just questions about the quality of the design as well. I noticed on the last page of the design, which is page 83, it states the garden area as being 60% of the design. That's clearly not the space. I measured it, but you can look at that and see that the garden area is not 60% of the design. So there's deficiencies in the design itself. I've just finished doing a renovation of 303 Gilbert Road, which is 2 doors up. I know that the property itself falls to the back and the point of discharge for stormwater is at the front. There's nothing in the design for pumping water from the back to the front. Given how constrained the site is, I don't know where they're going to put all the pits and pumps and everything else that's required to do that. And basically, to probably quote Councillor Amir earlier on, they've tried to squish as many apartments as they can into a very small space. I think that's it from my perspective.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Gladman. And I do apologise at the beginning. I referred to you as the applicant. You're obviously an objector. I hope that was clear to all councillors present. Can I confirm that the applicant is not here? No. Oh, the applicant is here. I apologise. You're not on my list. I'll invite you down to introduce yourself. Did you want to speak to the application? No. Okay. Sorry, if you'd like to speak to the application, you're very welcome to do so, and I'll get you to come down to the table. If you could just state your name so that we all know. Thank you.
I'm possibly a bit nervous because I'm not used to talking to so much people, but my name's Safet Suljvic. My father's the owner of that property, and we've lived there as a family for 16, 17 years. We ran it as a milk bar, and I quite like the area, but you know, we've had to move out of there for different reasons. I'd like to state that what the previous objector said isn't true, that there are triple-storey developments happening in the area, and they're very close within proximity, just before Bell Street, where a reception was built within a year ago. That's a triple-storey development, and there are a few down the road as well, which have been proposed and put forth. I thought I'd make that clear here. Yeah.
Thank you for that presentation tonight.
No problems. Thank you.
Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor McCarthy, followed by Councillor Newman.
Yes, if we could just have a response from officers in relation to the matter raised by the objector about the sizing of the bedrooms and the potential, sorry, not the bedrooms, the retreats and the potential use of those as bedrooms in the future.
Yeah, I think what the officer's done is looked at the functional design. They don't have doors, they're generally open. And I do take what the resident has said about, yes, there are times where we do play a bit of cat and mouse with enforcement, but I can assure Mayor Rennie that we have followed up a number of occasions where we know approvals have been granted for 2 bedrooms and they're promoted as 3 bedrooms. They are things that we inquire, and if we had this dispute in VCAT, VCAT would remind us of our statutory enforcement obligations. But generally speaking, if we do undertake an assessment, we do take consideration, could it be used as a bedroom? And what we are mindful of, and the car parking assessment in the report takes you through this, being on tram route 11, there is certainly consideration for alternative forms of transport, and a single car space for each of those dwellings is considered acceptable in this location.
Can I
Thank
just
you.
ask a
Councillor
supplementary,
McCarthy, yep.
if I may, just to pick up on a point that Mr Rudd raised, if this was to be approved and it was to play out the scenario as proposed by the objector, that it was to be advertised as a 3-bedroom apartment, what would be the that enforcement action that would occur, and what is the trigger for that, just to understand practically how this plays out? What actually happens? Is it a request to council to enforce the rule by a neighbouring resident? How does that work?
Mayor Rennie, it works 2 ways. There's sometimes we've actually spotted things in the local realestate.com advertisements, or there have been, and Councillor McCarthy's correct, quite often it is raised by an adjoining resident who's had an interest in the development as it's emerged.
Thank you. Councillor Newton indicated prior, Councillor Lawrence, and then I'll move straight to you after Councillor Newton.
Mine was about the retreats as well, so it's covered.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I've got 2 questions to the officers. One is, if these retreats with adjoining en-suites had an 820mm door put on them, they'd actually be master bedrooms. But if that was the case, what would be the car parking requirements or deficiencies in this application?
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Over to you, Mr Rudd.
So the configuration is, and we're playing a bit of speculation, Mayor Rennie, there's a single bedroom with a study, has 2 bedrooms, if the studies are shown to be, and in this case I don't think it would be practical to use it as a bedroom. That would require a single car space. Assuming the other single bedroom, that's also a single car space, so that's 2, then there's 4 further bedrooms. The typical planning scheme requirement, if they were 3 bedrooms, is that those 4 would each require 2 car spaces. So if it was a development of 2 2-bedroom plus 4 3-bedroom, it would be 4 short under the technical requirements of the planning scheme, if that was the case.
Thank you, Mr Rudd.
Just a supplementary, I was just requesting, what is the overall deficiency if they were bedrooms?
4 is
For
what
the
I've
whole
heard.
development, I was trying to...
If they were considered bedrooms, is that...
Yes. There's a technical addition, Mayor Rennie, for the shop, but it's, I'm sure if it was argued out, there could be an arguable case for credit for the existing shop floor space. So there's a technical credit of 1 for the existing shop.
Thank you. Councillor Lassurf and then Councillor Amir.
I just had a question that was raised by the objector around the stormwater. I note that there is a condition in the recommendation around that. Would that condition capture the concerns raised by the objector?
Through you, Mayor Rennie, that's absolutely correct. That condition's required to have a proper qualified analysis of the stormwater arrangements and to ensure that they do discharge to the legal point of discharge. And I can say on pumping systems, they're not something that council supports. So the requirement there would need to be a gravity-fed system to a legal point of discharge, and often some of these developments have required to put in additional infrastructure to make that connection requirement.
Thank you, Mr Rudd. Councillor Amir.
My query was also around the stormwater and particularly because we know West Preston is a tricky area with flooding. I feel like barely a week goes by that I get phone calls from West Preston residents worrying about stormwater. And in this side, I guess I am, it's a bit concerning in that we've got a right of way that leads to a shed. We know if you, that the site slopes to the south. So I guess my question is, where is the legal point of discharge? And I guess without kind of going to the details, are there options to be able to manage that? And I'm particularly concerned about the southern part of the site, given that the north we've got the grassy areas and we've had a lot of concerns, well, other residents have had concerns in this area with stormwater running through the house. So if there was a comment on that as well. So not rising floodwaters, but surface water concerns and whether that might be a problem with the garage design.
Thank you, Councillor Mear. Mr Rudd.
Thank you, Mayor Reddy. This has taken me in the realm of a civil engineer, but I won't go into that space. What I can say is that there's obviously, if you look at one of the diagrams that's in there, I might just put it up on the screen for you now, just the site plan. What this shows is there's a right of way. So yes, everyone's correct that there is fall there to the south. There's also a right of way at the rear of the property. So there could well be, yes, there's a legal point of discharge in Bruce Street. There is also a legal point of discharge at Gilbert Road. Either option is open.
Okay. Thank you, Mr Rudd. Are there further questions? If not, councillors, does anyone have a motion they'd like to present to the meeting? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Reddy. I'd like to move an alternate motion that council refuses this application.
Thank you. We might seek to get that on the screen. Do we have the alternate coming? Councillor Newton, can you check that that's the motion you would like to move? And if so, I will ask if there's a seconder for that motion.
Yes, it is.
Is there a seconder for that motion? If there is no seconder, that will lapse. Okay, that's lapsed. Councillors, does anyone have a motion? Councillor Amir?
I'm happy to move the motion as listed in the planning report.
Thank you, Councillor Amir. Is there a seconder for that?
For the purpose of the debate, I'll second that.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Amir.
I absolutely agree that the proposal at this site is something that is quite different to what is in the surrounding blocks. It is an area where it is mostly single-storey family homes. I've walked up and down that strip quite a lot, but it is an area that, like Plenty Road, will be experiencing gradual change, and this is part of that. One of the considerations I had in looking at this, a couple of things. One is that it is a industrial building to the south, so in terms of some considerations about overlooking and overshadowing that we get, we don't have to have that as a concern. I was happy with the response around stormwater drainage, which was an original concern of mine, but seeing that the lay of the land, the water's likely to flow down to Bruce Street, I think that's a good outcome. And while noting the concerns around the use of those study nooks and retreats, I also think it is nice to see some plans come to us where it's not just that bare minimum, just, you know, having a bedroom and then something that's a kitchen, living, dining all in 3 metres kind of situation, that these units are the kinds of units where you can have multiple people living there and having be in different parts of the house and have some privacy and peace and quiet. And I also acknowledge that the design, when I first looked at it, is a bit unusual. It's a bit, it's not common to have some units over 3 levels. And then I remembered that when I was house hunting a few years ago, I was looking at a unit that was over 3 levels. And the reason for that is it does provide that sense of space, and whether it's a family or a share house, being able to have lots of people at home and have a corner that feels like your own, and while your housemate's off doing something else, is something of value. It is on the Gilbert Road tram line. It is a very good location in terms of proximity to public transport and easy access up to the Regent Street shops and not far down to Miller on Gilbert. So I think it will be in hot demand, these apartments, and I wanted to thank the objector and the speakers who came to speak with us today. I hope that some of the issues raised can be resolved, but overall I think this is a supportable application.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. This application for me, to pick up on a comment in fact made by the objector, presents some challenges, but the conditions on the balance of it have gone a great deal of the way to addressing what I consider are those challenges. And the point made by the objector that this is an attempt to squeeze a lot of units onto one lot, I think that is correct. I think there is has been an effort to maximise the number of dwellings in the context of what is actually allowable under the planning scheme. And I'd make particular reference to the surprise that the objector shared, which would be shared, I think, with many residents, which is that they are in fact in a 3-storey area. That is not a Darebin Council decision. That is actually a Victorian zoning decision under the state government. And I think it's worth noting that that's important, that many of us in fact live in areas that have an applicable 3-storey level, height level. So whilst it is not the case that we have lots of 3-storey buildings in these sorts of locations, it is in fact, where appropriate, an allowable component under the planning scheme, and that's the Victorian planning rules around zoning, not the Darebin ones. In relation, my greatest concern was the issue that was raised by the objector, however, which was in relation to the potential conversion of those retreats into additional bedrooms. Whilst I have that concern, and that concern remains, the fact of the matter is that that in and of itself is not a strong enough ground for me to support a refusal in this space, because I'm certain that this would be approved at VCAT, just as Mr Rudd had outlined. The trigger for having additional bedrooms would of course require, under the technical rules, additional parking spaces. However, I would expect at VCAT those would be waived because of the proximity to the tram line. So on that basis, on the balance of the evidence in both ways, I feel the need to support it on this occasion.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lasserf.
I have a proposed amendment, and I'd like to seek guidance from the officers whether this should be part of the notice of decision or go into the notations. I'll read the amendment. Residents of any dwelling within this development will not be eligible for on-street parking permits under the Darebin Residential Parking Permit Scheme or any successor scheme in respect of parking permits.
Thank you. We'll get some advice from Mr Rudd about...
My advice, Mayor Rennie, would be to make that a notation on the notice of decision up front.
Can I just ask a question about that?
Certainly.
Does often the notice of decisions are attached to contracts of sale or those sorts of things. Does the notations also get attached? Does it form a whole?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a complete part of the permit, because there's also conditions attached to which are state regulated forms on the rear of the permits. So,
okay.
And yeah, it'll appear much the same as if you notice our agenda here, there are notations included at the bottom of the agenda. So it would, for example, be listed as N4.
Okay. So I'd like to propose an amendment that those words that I read out is added as a notation to this permit.
Okay, I'll ask if that's acceptable to the mover, and is that acceptable to the seconder?
Acceptable to the seconder on the basis that just the wording gets tidied up if need be by officers to comply. But yeah, happy to accept that.
Great. Thank you. That's now part of the motion. That's all that's before us. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'd like to speak against this motion. So for me, this is one of the most blatant examples of where a retreat could be used as a bedroom. As Councillor Lawrence pointed out, it's an ensuite. So it's an ensuite to what will absolutely become a bedroom. So for me, we're being presented with what are allegedly 2-bedroom townhouses, but they're absolutely 3-bedroom. So for me, I just think that this one it's so obvious. I can't support it.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, through you, Mayor Rennie, I'd just like to speak against the motion in front of us on just 2 grounds quickly. One, obviously, I certainly take the point of Councillor McCarthy that a 3 or 4 car park deficiency may be waived by VCAT. That's probably inevitable. But I sort of feel very uneasy rubber stamping the use of plans of the term retreat. It is either a living room, obviously in the layout and in the general lifestyle of Australia, or it is with one door or even a curtain turned into a bedroom with an ensuite. And I think we shouldn't be building in a 3-car deficiency because while it is a tram corridor, it is a primarily residential development. And in fact, we could be rejecting it on neighbourhood character grounds. But of course, we do want to see these blocks developed. But I would like to encourage a more honest submissions to this planning committee, in that, you know, we call things what they are and we deal with the car deficiencies on their merit. This is a little bit too underhand. And then in regard to the amended reference to the car parking policy, I'm aware there's a lot of community debate about these matters, and there's been promises even of reviews of current car parking, so I'm very reluctant to enforce what may impact on the sale price of these when we are going to be reviewing these things in the near future.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers? There being none, I'll offer a right of reply to Councillor Amir. You may ask another question, but I'll just get you to turn your microphone on. Yep.
My question was around the amendment from Councillor Lassurf, and if there were changes to the Darebin permit policy in the future, whether those changes would be equally applied to this property as any other property, or whether different circumstances would continue to apply to this property.
Thank you. I'll pass that question to Mr Rudd, but we'll point out that it's no longer an amendment to the motion, but...
The additional notation.
Thank you.
As I understand, Mayor Rennie, there was a clause in the sentence that said a policy as amended at the time was also included in that statement. So I would take that to read that if there was a subsequent change to the parking policy or arrangements in the future, that they would be applying to successors in title.
Thank you. No right of reply. Okay, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is lost. Councillors, I'll ask whether anyone has the alternate motion, perhaps Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'd like to...
You can't put the alternative motion.
Because it lapsed?
You'll need to put an alternative to the alternative.
Can I move an alternative motion with the amendment that Councillor Surf had for the last one?
Just wait 1 second while I seek some advice.
Okay.
None of you seconded it. Here's some eggs.
Mayor Rennie, through you, got an alternative motion to move.
Councillor Lawrence has an alternative motion. That would be terrific. Councillor Lawrence, thank you. Your motion?
I would move that we move the officer recommendation as printed with the accepted notation, given the explanation about that I've got, and an added amendment that the plans of the 3 retreats are relabelled as bedrooms, and council notes the 4 car park deficiency.
Okay, so the motion is as per the agenda. I'll just repeat this to make sure we understand, with an additional condition, which is that the retreats be relabelled as bedrooms, and that we note the subsequent deficiency in parking. And including that notation. Okay.
I'm going to ask a good governance question, Mayor, if I can, through you to Mr Rudd before considering whether to second this.
You may.
Which is, are there any implications as a result of making that notation to those spaces as bedrooms that Planning Committee should be aware of before it considers this? And I'm in particular, anything that necessitates as a result of it being called a bedroom that's different to the current status.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Rennie, it does take away any ambiguity. The development is now would be an additional 4 car spaces short. So there'd be an additional waiver of parking. And I don't think the officer's assessment has taken you through that implication. What it has done, though, is it's explained there's been some changes to the floor layouts. I'm not sure that that's been picked up. It does explain that it is difficult to, or there is some difficulty in using those spaces as bedrooms. And I need to point out that the version that was advertised, to be fair to the resident who's spoken to you, the version of the plan that the resident would have seen, I think would have been more fairly described as bedrooms, but the one on the screen before you, that you have in your agendas, I think has some configuration challenges to an easy or readily conversion to a bedroom.
So, well, I'll withdraw the motion given the discrepancy on what's advertised, etc. That is a procedural problem for objectives.
Okay. Thank you. So we once again find ourselves without a motion. Yes, Councillor McCarthy.
If I can seek some advice from Mr Rudd in relation to this application and the absence of a motion to approve the motion or refuse it, am I correct that this would return to a planning committee at a future date for a decision? Or is there an opportunity for planning committee to seek the advertising of the application as per Councillor Lawrence's proposal as an alternative?
Sorry, I'll just ask Mr Rudd.
Yeah, through you. I may defer to our governance experts on the procedure, but you do have the option to defer the item. You may want to ask for further information on the retreat areas or some further details. I think you're limited in some of the other options, but I would take advice from our governance experts.
Thank you.
Thank you. With apologies to members of the gallery, we will just get the governance advice and proceed. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I'd like to move an alternate motion, which is very similar to the previous one, but it has an additional point for the retreats can easily be used as bedrooms.
Okay, thank you. Can we get the words for that motion up on screen? So I'll just get you to put that up so that we can be certain that the person who may second it knows what they're seconding.
Yes. Being tested here.
So we'll just wait for Councillor Newton's motion to be put up on screen. So that last bit reading and will have an impact on the required car parking. So is there a seconder for that?
Well, Mayor Rennie, I have a question.
Yes.
That point 4 sort of reads like a note or an observation rather than a grounds.
No, look, I disagree. I think it says that council refused the application on grounds as follows, and then point 4 is the retreats can easily be used as bedrooms.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, could I ask the officers, is that a strong ground to go to VCAT with?
Is this a strong ground?
I'll
Through
see.
you, Mayor Rennie, I would say it is an arguable ground if those spaces are used as bedrooms.
Thank you. So is there a seconder? Certainly. Councillor Williams has a question. Yep.
Considering the amount of concern that we all have regarding this particular one, is it possible that we defer it and have a mediation between the officers and the objectors that are here?
I don't want to get into a suggestion. Can we deal with this first? Because I have a motion in front of me that has been put forward by Councillor Newton. I'm seeking to
For
know...
purposes of the debate, I'll second the motion to keep us moving.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So similar to before, I see very clearly to me that the retreats would be used or advertised as third bedrooms for some of the apartments. And the reason I say that is because if you look at the plans, what's considered bed 1 on the, I think it's the ground floor, has a deck in just the same way the retreat has a deck. And similar to what I was saying before, I don't really see that you would use if this is a lounge room, then why does it have a shower attached and an ensuite? So for me, this third bedroom with ensuite is a reason to not accept this application, because what has been brought to us being called a retreat is not accurate.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor McCarthy, do you wish to speak?
No, I don't. I'll reserve my right.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers to this motion? Councillor Lawrence.
Just a question, Mayor Rennie. If this motion fails, is the committee able to move a deferral motion so that we can have the other Kazali Ward councillor also here to look at this application?
I don't want to preempt this, but obviously other motions may be possible depending on the outcome of this motion, but we have a motion in front of us that I would like to debate in the first instance. Are there any further speakers to this motion? There being none, I'll put this to the vote. All those in favour? And against? That motion is lost.
Rennie, I'd like to put a deferral motion that we consider this application at the next planning meeting. And obviously then we might have some more councillors too.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder for the motion to defer this to the next planning meeting? Councillor Williams, thank you.
Is it possible that we also ask for our officers to engage?
No, I think, well, can we just defer it? It's very much up to the officers. Okay. Councillor...
Can I...
Okay, this is a procedural motion, so there's no debate on that procedural motion. So that's been moved by Councillor Lawrence, seconded by Councillor Williams. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And against? We're rather at an impasse,
Yes.
having failed both to grant the planning permit, having failed to decline the planning permit, and having failed to defer this to another meeting. I will once again seek some governance advice. Councillors, as we have failed to make a decision tonight in relation to this planning permit, I'll close the meeting now, there being no decision, and the matter will no doubt be made in decision by VCAT.
Mayor, can I just ask that we make it clear to both the applicant and the objector that officers make make it clear what their rights are under this situation, which is extremely disappointing that we haven't made a decision.
Yes, I'm sure that the officers will be able to have that discussion with the applicant and objectors to let them know of what the next steps might be. Thank you for coming tonight. I do apologise to both the applicant and the objectors. I understand that this is a difficult situation, and I hope that our staff will be able to assist you in the future. The result is that Council has failed to make a decision in relation to this planning application, and the Council officers will provide you with some guidance as to what the next steps may be. So thank you for coming tonight, and I'll now declare the meeting closed. Thank you, Councillor Le Cerf, for that excellent reminder. There is more business. And the next item of business is, in fact, the general planning information scheduled VCAT applications.
I'll move the recommendation, Mayor.
Moved recommendation by Councillor McCarthy, seconded by Councillor Le Cerf. All those in favour? That motion is carried. I'll just check my agenda. There is no further business. Thank you. I now declare the meeting closed.